This video is all about expectations and negativity. So, um, one place where this occurs is with individual improvement. And I've talked about this before in a different video, so I won't go too in depth into this, but it's pretty common for people to set an unreasonable bar for how fast they should improve. And a lot of times it's just based on kind of what they think about other people and how fast they get good at something, but a lot of times, like, you don't always see the amount of effort that someone else puts in, so it's really common for people to just underestimate that and then set the bar for themselves too high. And then also, like, when you're starting out something new, you usually improve pretty quickly at the start, and then sometimes people kind of expect that to keep going, and then when it doesn't, then they start to feel depressed or things like that. So if you set that bar too high for yourself on individual improvement, a lot of times you're going to end up becoming depressed or getting frustrated at yourself. Like, why am I so bad? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this thing that should be easy? So that's one way that expectations can cause negativity, especially when you set them way too high. And then another one is with performance in a system. So, like a ranking system, you might expect that you ought to be at a certain level or a certain rank, or you should get a certain amount of wins or win at a certain percentage, things like that. And it's very easy to set those expectations too high as well. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but I'll mention some of them here. So, most skills have a lot of depth that's not like instantly obvious, and a lot of them require a lot of sub skills that aren't necessarily obvious. I'd say fighting games are a really good example of that because a lot of what the players are doing really, at least to to an observer, it doesn't look that hard because you just like if you're watching a game like Street Fighter, you just kind of walk back and forth, and sometimes you jump at the other person, and then you just press a button, and most people can do that. Um, and if you practice a little bit, you can probably do the same combos that the best players do as well. And some of the harder ones might take a lot of practice, but eventually you'll be able to do it as well. And then those are like the only obvious skills. Like, it doesn't look like necessarily that much is going on, but there really is a lot more depth to it and a lot of like understanding situations, making decisions really quickly under pressure, reading your opponent. There's like so much depth there that isn't obvious, but it will cause one player to win a lot more than another player. But because it's not obvious, a lot of times people will expect that they should be getting a lot better results than they actually deserve. And then another way this happens is because watching something is always easier than doing it, pretty much. So when I watch like professional Rocket League players, then for me it's I've actually watched a good amount. So like when they do a double tap off the wall, I can be like, oh, they're gonna hit it and do a double tap, and I've seen it so many times that it almost feels like I could do it myself, even though if I actually play the game, when I try to fly and hit the ball, a lot of times I'll miss, but so I obviously can't do it. But when I watch it, it kind of feels like I can do it. And if I were better at the game, then maybe I kind of could do it. But uh, a lot of times, like, to get to the same level of consistency or the same level of execution, it's actually really hard to get there. So even if you can do it sometimes, it's not the same. And you're not necessarily good enough to be at that level. And then this third point is that you have to judge yourself by your best, but you judge others by like their average or their worst. And this especially happens like if you're watching a famous player of something, like a pro player or something, like, you're gonna see when they mess up, and then that's gonna stand out to you, and you're gonna be like, "Oh my god, how is this person a pro because they messed up this thing?" And sometimes people make bad mistakes, but a lot of times, like, you're s you're, like, seeing the worst thing that happens that with the other people, and then when you play, you think about the best thing you ever do, and not so much like your average or your worst, and so you feel like you ought to be higher than you are. And this also happens when you play like in a game where it shows the rating of other players, where you might judge someone by the lowest rating you've seen from them. So you might see that sometimes they have a really low rating, and you're like, okay, this person's not that good. I should be winning against them. And then sometimes, like if there's variance in the game or your performance, and you have a really good day or something like that, and your rating goes really high, you start to feel like that's the level that you deserve, even though that's like your best, your like absolute best, and it might have just been luck, or you might have just had a rare, really good day, but it's not your average level. But you start to set that as your level of expectation for yourself, and you set the worst of others as your expectation for them. And then you start to feel like you're not getting what you deserve. So when this happens, it causes a lot of negativity. Like, um, if you just look at a lot of negative comments around any type of like rank system or rank game or things like that, a lot of it is just caused by setting this expectation too high of yourself. So you see a lot of anger at the system where people are like, something's wrong with this system because it's not like letting me get the rank I deserve. You'll see a lot of anger at teammates in team games where people always say their teammates do something dumb and that causes them to lose, and it happens every game over and over. There's something wrong with the system and my teammates. Frustration with other players not necessarily on your team. So like you might get upset at the choices that other players make in the game, even though it's like part of the game, the other people make choices, but you feel like they shouldn't have made that choice, and you lost because of that in a way that you shouldn't have lost or something like that. And then something you'll see a lot too is people will get really frustrated with any kind of variance or random chance, even more so than you would like expect when this happens. So like um, you'll see people complain about any kind of like random thing that goes wrong or any kind of variance where it's like I had a 51% chance to win and I lost. Oh my gosh, so terrible. I hate this game. And then they'll just like go crazy. And it's like, yeah, but that's a normal thing. Or it's like variance that doesn't change the outcome. People will start to complain about that and get frustrated at that. Whereas like, yeah, but you still won. Like, even though you got unlucky, but you still won. So why why would you get so upset about it? Things like that. So when these expectations get too high, you see a lot of these frustrations and negativity come out. And it can also be like you might not necessarily blame other people or other things, but you get really disappointed in yourself. You're like, again, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get this rank or get this level? Something's wrong with me. And I would say that's probably not even all of it. There's probably more ways that you'll see negativity from something like this. And there's the note that sometimes these things are flawed. Sometimes there are problems with the system. Sometimes your teammates make mistakes. Sometimes you get unlucky. And all of this is sometimes true. But when you set that expectation too high for yourself, a lot of times it just very much magnifies all of these frustrations where there's like some truth to them, but then it just goes well beyond, like, it just gets overwhelming and over exaggerated. It goes beyond what's actually true, or you just get really frustrated at something that kind of doesn't even make sense to get upset about. And then sometimes this even harms, like, when you're actually trying to get better at something because you end up playing for status instead of improvement. You're like playing to get that rank you deserve, even if it means like taking advantage of the system. Like, you only, it allows you to not play against people. Like, some rank systems allow you to not play against someone when you match against them. So you might only play against people who you expect that you, or who you feel pretty comfortable that you can beat, so that your rank keeps going up, even if you're not actually getting better. So things like that happen, or you might avoid any type of situation where it might um, kind of cause you to like lose face, or you might avoid the types of challenges where you might lose, even if those might help you get better. You're going to avoid them sometimes. So really, setting these expectations too high can cause a lot of negativity that you might not expect. And just as a note, having too low expectations can be a problem as well. And that'd be like if someone feels like they never deserve anything. So you might feel really negative about things, and that's probably not going to make other people feel better too. Like, sometimes you feel like you're you're kind of taking something you don't deserve. So you like say like, "Oh, I didn't deserve that." It's like, I I'm not actually this good. I just got lucky, or things like that. But a lot of times, that like that's not going to make anyone happier anyway. And if you tend to have success in the long term, then you probably deserve it, is what I'd say. So too high expectations cause a lot of negativity, but too low can cause some negativity, usually more internal at yourself, though. Now, if you want to overcome this, I think the best way to do it is to have what I would call a challenger's mindset, where you're challenging something difficult, like you're trying to um, do something that's really amazing, really difficult, and if you win, it's a great success. But if you lose, it's like, well, I can still challenge it again the next time, or I can try for it again later, or something like that. So, something like a really high rank in a game, I'd say the best thing you can do is to think of it as something that you strive for that's a difficult accomplishment. So, sometimes people set it as an expectation where it's like, they'll compare themselves to the people who are at the top level, and they'll set that level as their expectation. And I just don't think that ever really makes sense until you're like, unless you like, you're so into it, like you've done it for so long. But it should be more like an accomplishment if you make it. It's a challenge to try to get there. So it's not so much something that you should feel depressed or upset about if you don't make it. And if you can have that kind of mindset, then I think you're gonna it's gonna be a lot easier and a lot less frustrating to take on a lot of difficult challenges and see yourself improve over the long run. Now, communities actually come into play with this as well, and what you'll see happen a lot of times is that like communities will actually make this problem even worse. So, like, a community might set an expectation on a way of playing or on a certain environment. Like, one way of playing is bad, so if you play a certain way, you're supposed to win. That's the expectation. And if you play a different way, you're supposed to lose. That's the other side of the same expectation. And then, just like before, these types of expectations often cause a lot of negativity, either from the people who can't reach it, they're like, I'm supposed to be winning because I'm doing the good thing. So now they get kind of frustrated. Or sometimes even like people on the other side, like, they might be saying, I don't think this other way of doing it is bad. So now they're kind of upset because they feel like they're getting like discriminated against or something, or things like that. And then, so people get frustrated on both sides, and then the expectation gets even more hard set, where it's like, oh no, because like when people are frustrated, a lot of times they'll kind of express that frustration, and then they'll say like, no, I was supposed to win, I like, but this person did this thing that shouldn't have been that it shouldn't have been good or something like that. And then the same things get repeated and everyone else hears it and everyone else repeats it, and then there's just more and more and more negativity. And then a lot of times you can see some like really hateful actions or hateful words, and it's kind of an accepted thing as long as it goes along with the expectation. Like, you say people who play in that certain way are terrible people and they're awful, and they don't deserve to win anything, and they're just rotten people. And then like in a community that is otherwise generally nice towards other people, statements like that might become accepted and just like the norm. It's like other people are like, oh, I understand what you're saying, yeah, that makes sense. And then sometimes even like if you try to go against it in a nice way, you can be like, I don't think it's that bad. They're like, then the community might go against you and say like, oh, you're like causing arguments, you're being toxic or something like that. So I have a lot of examples of this, but one would be like in fighting games, there's an expectation that, at least in the past, there was, and I think it's changing now, but there's an expectation that offline fighting game players are supposed to be better than online fighting game players. So you'll see that expectation cause a lot of negativity, where it's like people just be very negative about like playing online. They'll say it's a terrible thing, it ruins the experience. You can't get good by playing online, and playing online is really unfair. It causes the like lesser skilled player to win and all things like that. So then that all that negativity causes people to get frustrated. So like um, anytime anyone in the community plays online and does any worse than what's expected, then they like kind of repeat the same statements like, oh, see, it's terrible because I dropped this one combo one time, therefore it's terrible. The whole experience was ruined. And then they'll say it's not fair, it's causing the lesser player to beat me, things like that. And then everyone hears that and they start to repeat that, and then it just goes on and on and on. And then um, again, you can do like pretty hateful things and it becomes kind of accepted. And it's like you'll see a lot of public shaming, at least in the past, of like, oh, this person's an online player, this person said this statement about supporting playing online, therefore they're a bad person, everyone should make fun of them, and all of that. And so that's like one example. And I'd say fighting games are pretty bad with this. Um, so I would say I think like that's kind of changing, that like people aren't so negative towards online players as much, but they always find something else like tiers in the game, or the strategy you use in the game, or the game itself, where people will say they're really good at fighting games, but the they aren't winning in the new fighting game, so therefore the new fighting game isn't rewarding them for their skill, and there's a problem with the new game. But that's actually more often a problem with the expectation of the person coming into the game, and they expect that they should be so much higher than they actually are, and then there's all that negativity. And then a lot of times it's like really the popular players or community leaders where everyone will follow what they say and repeat it, and then it just goes on and on. So Mahjong has this as well. So one example of this in Mahjong would be with there's a uh, it's not so new anymore, but it was pretty recent, pretty new. There's a Mahjong platform called Mahjong Soul where it um, it has a lot of cute girls and things like that. So um, some people just play it for the cosmetics and just for the characters, and they might not know how to play Mahjong at all. And um, before that, the online platform that had been around for a long time was Tenho. So this is the Tenho icon or logo, and um, so people kind of trust Tenho. They see it as the standard, at least in the communities I'm in. So, and then a lot of the like a lot of the new players in Mahjong Soul really weren't that good. So, um, what kind of ended up happening is that the community set the expectation that Mahjong Soul players are bad at Mahjong. So it's going to cause a lot of negativity where, like, if you learn Mahjong from Mahjong Soul, then you're kind of going to feel worse about yourself or your own accomplishments in Mahjong Soul because, like, everyone says, oh, Mahjong Soul players are bad. So you're gonna feel you're gonna feel bad about that. And then anytime anyone doesn't win in Mahjong Soul, they're gonna feel bad and they're gonna feel a lot of negativity because there's that expectation that the players there are supposed to be bad. So you're supposed to be winning, and if you don't, well, you're gonna feel all that negativity that I mentioned before. So um, a lot of ways it comes out is like people will say, or people will be really critical of every decision the opponents make. So they'll say like, "Oh my God, look at this person who did this terrible move." Like I know it's terrible because they're a Mahjong Soul player, and those players are bad. And look at how terrible it is. Or like, they'll be like, "Oh, look at this other decision they made. That's also terrible." Or like you'll see people get really upset about any kind of variance, and so like they might say like, "Oh, the game is rigged because I'm not winning," but they might also just say, "Oh, there was this really rare event that happened, so therefore the game is rigged and it's bad and people shouldn't play it and it's terrible and I can't stand it." And again, it goes back to what I talked about in this one where people feel some like extreme frustration with any kind of variance or random chance, and it often doesn't really makes sense. It's like it's like, yeah, but you're playing a random game. Or like, so if anyone gets results that are any worse than what they expect, there's even more frustration, and then people will express it, and then um, it'll harden the expectation that it's like, oh, I've heard everything that everyone else says, and everyone says that Mahjong Soul players are bad, and you're supposed to beat them, and then it just goes on and on. And you'll see like some serious accusations like people will complain that the system is rigged very seriously off of very small evidence that doesn't really make sense, and but they'll be like really serious just because of all that frustration and negativity around the whole expectation that was set. So here's another one like four wide in Tetris where so the common idea is that four wide causes less skilled players to get undeserved wins. So if you don't know what that is, four wide is a very special combo strategy in Tetris where it's unlike the whole rest of the game, which is to either make Tetrises or make T-spins, because T-spins became a thing in newer games. Tetrises and T-spins are normally the best way to send lines to the opponent and win the game, but if you can get combos where you clear lines with every piece that you put down. You can send a whole bunch of lines when you get to the high combos, and then um, this special 4 wide setup allows you to pretty easily get very big combos, and you can send huge amounts of garbage without getting any Tetrises or any T-spins, and you might not be very good at making Tetrises or making T-spins, but because you can do this 4 wide setup and execute it well, you can get wins pretty easily. So that I would say that statement really is true. Like less skilled players can get wins through 4 wide that maybe they didn't deserve, but um, it tends to get over exaggerated where it's like um, people start to just complain about any like they see 4 wide and they're like, oh, this player is terrible, this player is bad, they're using 4 wide, and then like it just goes on and on and on, and like um, to the point where it's like um, you'll see a lot of these complaints, but you'll see like bullying or harassment or shaming of people who use 4 wide, and just so much negativity that really isn't deserved, and it's more comes more from the expectation that you should be winning, and sometimes that expectation isn't even correct. So it's like you'll see all this like negativity, all of this like I've seen where it's like people can say really terrible things about other people who use 4 wide in a community that's otherwise like a nice community. And it's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. The person used 4 wide in Tetris. And it's like, so that doesn't make them a terrible human being, and that doesn't mean that you should bully them and harass them and things like that. But people, that kind of becomes accepted. And then I've also seen like people try to say something positive, and then it's like, oh no, you're causing arguments. You're a bad person. You can't, like, you're doing something wrong. And it's just, it gets too extreme. And you can come up with countless examples of this happening. Like, I have some more here, like DDR charts. Like, people say, well, they can't get a full perfect on it immediately, so that means the chart's bad, but it's usually a problem with the expectation of the player that like they ought to be able to just get it perfect on it instantly, and if they can, it's bad. But like if a community gets that whole expectation set, then that whole idea gets repeated a lot, and you see all that negativity building up. And then Puyo and harassments, it's kind of like 4 wide, but at a um, at a lesser level, I'd say. Like especially at the top levels, harassment is a really difficult and complicated mechanic that I think adds a lot of depth and um, a lot of excitement to the game. But at a low level, sometimes like people who are just kind of building chains kind of slowly and maybe not consistently will get hit by a harassment, which is like an early attack, and then they'll lose, and then they'll get upset, and then because they feel like they should have been winning, and then if a community sets this expectation, then it's going to build up this whole negative feedback loop. Same thing with StarCraft. Like sometimes the other player will use a rush build, and the person who is using a normal build feels like they should have been winning, or like people will complain about race imbalances. Like one race is better than the other. Like I should have been winning, but the other race is better than mine. And then you'll see more negativity build up. Pretty much any rank system out there has this kind of thing where it's like people expect that they should be higher rated, but then sometimes that whole expectation gets built into a community, and then like everyone starts to feel that way, and you see a lot of negativity build up throughout the whole community. Now, again, it's not so much that all the complaints are always wrong. Like in fighting games, playing offline is nicer than playing online. That's true. And it's like in Mahjong, I think a lot of Mahjong solo players aren't really that good. Like some of them are completely brand new to the game and they're just like clicking buttons and they don't know what they're doing. And four wide really does cause some less skilled players to get wins against higher skilled players. And sometimes you can have bad DDR charts. Sometimes harassments in Puyo can cause a less skilled player to beat a higher skilled player. And all of those, like, these complaints aren't always wrong, but they tend to get out of hand quickly. And then you just see a whole bunch of negativity that doesn't really have to be there. So, this is a bit of a different topic, but um, for a lot of times you're going to have to set your own expectations. And again, there's problems with taking expectations from others, like taking the expectation from a community. Like the community might believe you should be at a certain level, and sometimes, sometimes it's not always good to take that as an expectation for yourself. Like something you'll see is like depending on the community you join, some some people, like if you join a fighting game community, some people have been playing fighting games for years and years. So yeah, for them, a certain level is natural. But if you haven't been playing for years and years, you don't want to take that same expectation from other people and apply it to yourself because it doesn't apply to you. And then another thing that happens is a lot of times people will just think like, oh, someone else seems to get good at something really fast, so I'm going to set that as my expectation for how good I should be or how quickly I should get good at something. And one problem with that is a lot of times people like don't even know how much other people have done something. So like I have this picture. This is from one account on Prio versus 2 from like many years ago actually, and I played whatever 30,000 games on it on this one account. I had some other accounts too, and then this is Prio versus 2. I also played Prio versus 1. I also played on DS. There's a Puyo Pop Fever on DS. I played it on GameCube. I played a lot more on DS though, because I just play like uh, 50 wins against a computer, 50 wins against the AI, or I'd play like a set to 100 against the AI or things like that. So um, a lot of people didn't really know that I played a lot of Puyo, but I played a lot of Puyo. And then, but like they didn't know, so they would set the expectation like, oh, I'm supposed to be this good if I'm really good at this, and then it like wouldn't make sense at all because they like didn't know how much it takes to get really good. So like this second point says, people often set expectations based on like a group or based on other people. This is kind of different, but people set expectations based on a group or without adjusting for like the the scope of the group. Like so if someone's like hanging out with a small group of local friends that don't really do the thing they're doing, then they'll set their expectation like at that same level, and then if they can like beat all of their friends, they'll feel like they're really good at whatever it is they're doing and they'll be happy. And then and then that same person will join like an international group, people from a whole bunch of different countries, and some of the best people from those countries are in that group. And then they'll set that same level of expectation based on the group. They'll be like, well, if I can just do better than everyone in the group, I'll be happy. but this group is now like international best in the world people, things like that, and it really doesn't make sense as a expectation to set, but kind of like people sometimes too much so take their expectation from like the other people they hang out with, and sometimes they can set expectations that are just too high or that don't really make sense. So what I would say is the best way to get around this is to just have a self-improvement mindset and set your expectations based on yourself. So expect yourself to make small improvements over time and not so much as a comparison against other people. You compare against your past self. Are you like making small improvements compared to your past self? Set that as your level, and then if you succeed in doing that, you should take pride in that as an accomplishment, and you should be happy that you're meeting your expectation, which makes sense for you. So so even if you start really low, even if it's really hard for you to improve, you can set an expectation that makes sense for yourself and you can be happy. And if you can do that, and keep improving, eventually you'll just find yourself really high up at the end and you'll be really good and it'll be a lot less frustrating like when you compared to when you set expectations based on other people where a lot of times it just gets set too high and then all that negativity comes along with it. So I have an example here where um, So I've been playing DDR recently, trying to get better in a lot of ways, and this was a great score for me because like you can see, right, I was like getting high 97s pretty consistently on the same song, and so I jumped up so much, like an improvement of 0.13 is pretty good. This was like point 0.8 or whatever it is. Point 0.8 improvement, that's like crazy for me. So like I'm really happy about that improvement, but like I'm sure that there are people out there who can get 100% on this and on things that are harder than this. And so if I were like someone who set my expectations based on other people, I wouldn't even be happy about this, but I don't do that. So I'm really happy about this. And then shortly after, I actually got a better score too. Where like this is like the next play, I think. Not the same day. I played it again on another day. And then this is like a really big improvement off of the big improvement, so I'm like super happy about this. But again, if I were to set my expectations based on other people who are better than me, I look at this and I'd like not be very happy because it's not that good compared to some people. But I really don't do that. Like I think it's hard if you it may be hard to take on that mindset if you didn't really grow up with it but um it makes improving at something a lot nicer because like you don't have to like feel depressed when you're like not at the same level as someone else. So in summary, I think you really should watch out for when expectations cause negativity. So, like, if you're doing some kind of, like, if you're playing some kind of game and or pursuing some kind of goal and you feel a lot of negativity around it or a lot of frustration or like the random chance aspects of it really get to you a lot. Something to think about is if it's because of the expectations that you set for yourself. And this actually um, is not something that I'm immune to because when I played Mario Kart, um, when I was younger, and I eventually got the world record on one course on Mario Kart Wii, it really was a challenge. Like, I saw it as a challenge. I thought it's possible that I never get the world record in anything in my life, but if I do it, it would be a great accomplishment. I'd be really happy if I could do that. So, um, like, the variance actually never got to me because, like, yeah, unfortunate things would happen. Like, you would be having a great race where you raced your absolute best and then outplayed other people, and then you got to first, and then on the last lap, you got hit by a blue shell that you couldn't dodge, and then you fell to third, and then someone hit you, or like a random green shell was bouncing around and it hit you, and then you fell to like fifth, and then someone hit you with a red shell, and then you were like eighth, and then um, right when you got the item box, you got hit by the lightning bolt, and you lost your item, and then you got last. And that happened when you played the game, but like when I played, I didn't have that expectation that I should be winning every time, even if I was like really good. Um, so it was very easy for me to just think, oh man, that was unfortunate, but oh, hopefully I can do better next time. And I played with people who were like, who are of the kind that I was saying where like any kind of variance would cause them to get really upset. And it's like, even if they didn't lose a place, it's like, oh my god, this shell just randomly hit me, and I still got the same place, but the shell randomly hit me, and I almost didn't get the place that I was gonna get. Or it's like, I played with some people who were so negative, and back then, it never got to me. But nowadays, I've realized that it gets to me more, but it's more because my own expectations have just continued to go up because, like, I've just seen so much success. So, like, um, it's like, well, I've already gotten a world record, and then I got really good at a fighting game, and I'm pretty good at this puzzle game, and the expectation starts to get higher, where it's like, actually, I think I should be able to get to the top level maybe in this, and then it gets a lot more frustrating where when if it doesn't happen, if you get unlucky, and I can feel a lot of that too. So it's not an easy thing to necessarily get over, but at least if you're aware of it, you can kind of get a better sense of where that frustration comes from, and then that'll let you deal with it easier. And so another big point is when expectations get set by a community, a lot of times that can create the same negativity and it gets a lot larger and it affects a lot more people. So I went through a whole bunch of examples of that, but it really does happen a lot. And for yourself, if you set expectations based on others, a lot of times it's going to be frustrating or it's going to be a roller coaster where sometimes you'll feel great because like you're hanging out with people who aren't that good, and sometimes you'll feel terrible because you're hanging out with people who are really good, and it'll just kind of be a roller coaster. But if you could set your expectations based on yourself, then it's a lot less of that kind of roller coaster, sometimes really frustrating, sometimes really negative. That happens a lot less. So that's all I have for this video, and I hope it's useful. Thanks for watching.